The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." The charge hung above the criminal for all to see, so there would be no doubt as to why they were being crucified. Crucifixion, you remember, was very public, not like capital punishment in say, the States today, where it's hidden away and kind of private. The sight of the person hanging there and the sign above their head told everyone why, and was a deterrent so that other people might not go down this same path. But in the case of Jesus, I'm not sure that the Roman governor saw it so much as a charge, but as a statement of fact. Of course, I don't know his heart, but it would seem that Pilate remained unconvinced that this man had done anything wrong. Back in Mark 15, verse 2, Pilate had asked outright, "Are you the King of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied somewhat enigmatically. And Pilate seemed to find this title and Jesus' reply fascinating. And when it comes to releasing a prisoner as a kind of a Passover treat, Pilate asked the Jewish leaders, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" I think he's hoping they'll say yes. But when the chief priests stirred up the crowd to insist that Barabbas, not Jesus, be released, Pilate asked the chief priests, "What shall I do then with the one you call King of the Jews?" Almost as if to say, "Surely you do not want me to kill your king." And when they shout back, "Crucify him," Pilate comes back quite sternly and says, "Why? What crime has he committed?" And they just shout all the louder, "Crucify him." And Pilate sees that he's getting nowhere with these people. He understands that it's out of self-interest that the Jewish leaders have handed Jesus over, and he fears a riot, which would mean that his job is on the line, so he caves. Not before washing his hands symbolically in front of the crowd, as Matthew tells it in his version, and he declares himself innocent of Jesus' blood. So when it comes to this sign being put up, I think it's because Pilate actually believes it to be true. In fact, John's version, in John 19:21, the Jews protest, "Do not write that this man is the King of the Jews, but this man claimed to be King of the Jews." And Pilate comes back quite strongly and says, "What I've written, I have written." He's not going to change the sign. Friends, they killed their king that day. The one promised in the line of David, the long-awaited one, the one to whom the prophets had pointed, the one the Magi came asking to worship, the little baby born King of the Jews, the one who the soldiers mocked as King of the Jews, and yet, ironically, they spoke the truth in their mocking. He was the King. He was the King of the Jews, and he was the King of Kings, who in his triumph over death has conquered all and demonstrated that he really is King and Lord of all. He is that King of whom Isaiah wrote. We often read this at Christmas, but this is so significant here. "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." That is who this King is, who will come and put right all that we see wrong with the world right now. The one who will establish the new heavens and the new earth, where there'll be no more pain or crying or mourning or sadness or death, whose reign will be over an eternal kingdom. It will never end. And this King, he's not a tyrant or a bully or an oppressor. He is the servant King who served us by his death and gave his life as a ransom, as a rescue for the forgiveness of sins. Pilate was right to insist that this charge be pinned to that cross, and right to resist the call to change it to "this man claimed to be king." Pilate left it there as a great statement of fact. And the question I put to you this Good Friday is this: is he your king? Insults can be so cruel. There is Jesus hanging, slowly dying by struggling for every breath. That was the way crucifixion worked. And those out for a walk in the afternoon in the midst of a very eerie darkness, as they walked past the foot of this cross, they hurled insults at Jesus, shaking their heads. You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself. Oh, the irony. The irony that they use one of the misguided accusations raised in Jesus' appearance before the Jewish leaders. Yes, Jesus had said, destroy this temple and I will build it in 3 days, but the temple of which he was speaking was his body. God dwelt in the temple. God dwelt in Jesus. And as for being destroyed, he was being destroyed even as they threw up their insults at him. The call to come down from the cross and save yourself. Oh, irony again there. He could have done that at any time. He could have resisted arrest in the garden and escaped. He could have escaped the clutches either of the Jewish guards, the Jewish temple guards, or the Roman guards at any time. He could have broken free on his way out to the cross. He could have hopped down off the cross. But there was more mocking and more insults. This time from the very chief priests and teachers of the law who put him there, who made sure that he was crucified. Not satisfied merely by convincing Governor Pilate to put him to death, they rubbed salt into the wound by mocking Jesus. Hard to imagine. And they repeat the line of mocking taken by those walking past. He saved others, but he can't save himself. Oh yes, he could have saved himself. Make no mistake. In another place, in another gospel, we learn that Jesus had authority to lay down his life again and to take it up again. Friends, he goes voluntarily to the cross in obedience to his Father and in love for me and you. But to save himself would have meant he would not have saved us. He's there to save the very people who put him there, if only they would turn and ask for that. But if he had saved himself, he would not have saved me or you. One final irony in their mocking. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe. Are you kidding? Do you seriously reckon you'd believe in Jesus, you chief priests and teachers of the law, if he came down now from the cross? Seeing, friends, is not believing. They didn't believe when he opened the eyes of the blind. They didn't believe when he sent lame people home walking. They didn't believe when he unstopped deaf ears. They didn't believe when he stopped raging wind and storms. They didn't believe when he multiplied food. They didn't believe when he commanded evil spirits to come out of people, or mended withered arms, or stopped hemorrhaging, or walked on water, or even when he raised the dead. None of that had convinced them. Do you honestly believe that just one more trick would do it, coming down from the cross? Not on your life. Jesus had taught earlier that if someone had come back from the dead, people would not believe. And sure enough, Jesus was exactly right. He himself was raised from the death, and still people did not believe. There may be some watching today who have mocked Jesus and mocked those who follow Jesus. Maybe you've mocked the one sitting with you watching this today. And perhaps it is that your mocking is full of irony too. I'd believe in God if he just turned up. Irony. He did. I'd believe in life after death if somebody just came back and told us about it. Irony. Jesus did. I'd believe in God if only everything wrong with the world was made right. Irony. God has promised that will indeed be the case. I'd believe in God if there was no more suffering. Irony of a sort, in that the suffering Jesus went through for us will finally result in the end of all suffering once and for all. Mocking and irony. There at the cross, and so often today. But this one whom they mocked so cruelly that Friday afternoon was well and truly vindicated Sunday morning when he burst from the tomb alive and well. And for those with eyes to see and ears to hear and hearts ready to be humbled and softened, the one whom they mocked is the one who loves them so much that he didn't save himself so that they could be saved. Saved and forgiven for that very mocking. Forgiven for every other attempt to eject Jesus from their lives. Are you a mocker? I invite you today, I urge you today to stop. Because if you simply say, sorry, today, this Good Friday, his death will save you from sin, from death, and you will find yourself forgiven and reconciled to God for all eternity. Today's the day to stop your mocking, to consider the reality of what Jesus has done for you in his death and resurrection, and now come to seek forgiveness and relationship with him, the one who loves you so very much. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. And the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. What was this about? Why include this detail? Why this saying, which seems to be about a housekeeping matter down in the temple? What did this have to do with Jesus being crucified outside the city on the hill? Everything. This is no coincidence and no accident. Notice first the timing. The tear in the curtain was at the very moment Jesus died. Notice second, the nature of the tear. It was from top to bottom, meaning no person did this. It was 9 meters high. So we need to ask, well, what's the background here? What's the story? What's the meaning of this curtain tearing? This curtain wasn't just a window curtain to keep out the light. It didn't just stop the flies coming in or something like that. No, this curtain separated what was called the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple. The Holy of Holies was a very special place in the heart of the temple, within which was kept the historic commandments of God. The very stone tablets on which they had been cut, into which they'd been cut. This was the very heart of the temple where God dwelt. And only the high priest was allowed to enter into this inner holy room, and only once a year and only after certain sacrifices had been made. No one else was ever permitted access. But now the curtain was torn. And if you'd been in the temple that afternoon and saw the curtain torn and saw everything laid bare that had been behind the curtain, you would have been scared for your life. In fact, you may have run for your life. Because access to the presence of God, well, no one was allowed there. You surely could not go in there and live. But now the way was wide open. Everything in there could be seen and touched. What was happening? It was both simple and profound at the same time. Jesus' death on the cross makes possible our free access to the Father. That point could not have been made more clear. The symbolism was dramatic and it was liberating. In the letter to the Hebrews, it's one of the letters we have in our Bibles that date from the middle of the first century. It comments on this and it says that we now have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, that is, by the means of the death of Jesus, because by that death he has opened a new and living way through the curtain. Now, the temple's not even there for us to gain access to, but the meaning is, the significance of it is that you and I have access to God in our hearts, in our lives. Because Jesus' death has dealt with our rebellion. He's dealt with our living independently of God and doing our own thing. Jesus has paid the price for that, and so we gain access to God. Friends, that is the very wonderful news of Easter. That is why today is called Good Friday. Sinners can be forgiven. Rebels can be restored. Those who have made themselves their own gods have a way back to the one true God. People who have been doing their own thing can return to relationship with God and serve him as their Lord. Are you a believer today, a Christian? Please be totally clear about the significance of the curtain tearing. God is telling you that you can come to him, that you have full and free access to him, not because you've earned it or deserved it, not because you've spent a lifetime in church or nearly a lifetime on rosters, but because Jesus' death opens the way. The curtain came down. The barriers have been removed. The battle has been won. Jesus' work has been finished. The way has been made open. And yes, it is indeed Good Friday. Because with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. And the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom.